You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in this show are those of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. Join us as we discuss those topics and more, free from the ideologies of religion and superstition.
So, welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour again. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be talking about raising secular children. It's a topic that's come up in conversation quite often, and today I'll be discussing it with a few other guests that we've had on quite often. I believe we have Caleb.
How you doing?
And Dee.
Hello.
And we have a guest who may be offering some ideas. We have Andrew.
How you doing?
How you doing, guys?
Couldn't be better, man.
All right. So today we're talking about secular parenting or raising secular children. And as a secular parent myself, raising a child in a secular home, I thought this was just a really interesting topic because there's a lot of ideas that kind of go around when people hear about secular parenting or when people find out that that you're raising a secular child, and a lot of that can be based in myth immediately, especially when dealing with some people that I might not know so well, or they don't know that we're a secular household. They kind of have some knee-jerk reactions, and that's completely understandable because we, as humans, as a species, we kind of do tend to react against things that we don't understand very well before we think more rationally about them. So I thought that maybe to start off the show, we might start talking about some of those myths, some of those ideas that are out there, and just kind of address those to make sure everybody's on the same page. And then we might talk about some of the things that we've experienced or tips for raising secular children, and going into some of the benefits of those of raising a secular child, as well as some of the drawbacks, because I think it's important that we admit that as we're blazing that trail, as we're kind of doing what maybe the majority is not doing in some areas, that there are some drawbacks sociologically, and maybe other people might take a little bit of comfort knowing that we're sharing some of those, and maybe offer some ways to overcome those. Then lastly, I hope that we will have a chance to kind of talk about where some real issues can arise in our culture as we start to become more of a secular nation or a secular world. We're bound to see, and I'm sure we already have seen, some areas where there may be one secular parent and one non-secular parent, one religious parent, or a parent that just doesn't share those atheist or agnostic views, and how that can affect the family or affect a relationship, and maybe some ideas for how we can maintain a certain universal kindness or maintain those relationships. Or it might not even be two parents. It might just be a family or a couple that may be dealing with extended family that might not share the same views. So I'm hoping to get into that. I hope you guys will help me out with some of those ideas, and we can go from there. So the first thing I thought comes to mind when people start to think about parenting secular children, and I think we see it a lot in media sometimes, is that there's a general pushback. And the immediate question that a lot of people come up with is, well, how are you going to raise your child without a moral code? And I think that's one of the arguments that we sometimes get from some fairly militaristic religious people, or people that just don't understand how a secular child can be brought up with any kind of moral compass. Have you guys ever heard anything like that, or had any experience with that?
Not in my personal life, no.
I mean, I have, just coming out of religion initially. That was one of the first questions I had personally. How do I live morally without religion? So I haven't had that addressed specifically to my children or from an outside source asking me how I'm going to raise my children morally, but I definitely have thought about that issue. What kind of morals do I want to instill in my child? Should I instill any morals in my child? I mean, I've just asked all the questions, trying not to make any assumptions. The only one that I can really think of, I'm kind of not a big fan of indoctrination in general. Yeah, I don't think it can be avoided to some extent with children. So I really just, the only thing I consciously try to indoctrinate my child with is basically the golden rule: do unto others as they would have, you would have them do unto you, more or less.
Sure. Yeah. And, honestly, I was just thinking about the fact that, people who raise their children in some sort of religion, they might feel that they have some sort of advantage. They have these moral epics that have been passed down for thousands of years that are essentially like a guideline, as far as they're concerned, for, introducing morals to your children. They can just take a fable or a story from the Bible, put it into Sunday school format, feed that to their children, and they have a very easy and consistent way to teach what they consider to be moral. And I honestly don't know if there's a secular equivalent to that.
Yeah, not that I've heard of.
Well, maybe Aesop's fables. I don't, as far as I know, and I could be completely wrong, but I don't think they're specifically religious. But I think that fables are intended to teach a moral or ethical theme, or I mean, that's what creates a fable. So that might be something like that. But I agree. I don't think that that's necessarily like, secular parents carry around a book of fables and say, well, let's look in the book.
Sorry, I'm done. I'm trying. Broke me a little bit.
But
I'm sorry.
Has to say today.
But I think you're right. I think that is definitely might be considered a benefit, and I might even consider it a strong benefit, because it is an easy way to carry out what we think is one of the duties of parenting, which is to impress upon our children some kind of morals or ethics. But from my personal experience, we have always been interested in society and sociology and thinking about how cultures work. And so we've spent quite a bit of time abroad, living in different cultures and trying to learn more about how different people around the world raise their children, or just, how they interact with people. And through that, I've kind of started to think about morals from a relativist perspective, thinking more along the lines that morals and ethics kind of are a construct of society. They're a construct of culture, and they differ slightly from place to place. So what we might find even in Midwest America as being considered right or wrong or good could be different on the East Coast as opposed to the West Coast or up in Alaska. But I think throughout, and you'd see that all over the world. So I think that while that's true, and morals and ethics are very dynamic in that way, I also think that there are some universals that we find throughout the world, that we have some ideas about how stealing is bad, and that we should not kill each other. And I find that shared in cultures all over the world. So through that, I hope that I can help my daughter see all of those different perspectives and kind of learn to critically think about those ideas and establish her own ideas about what is good or ethical or moral based on what the world thinks, and have a consistent view on that.
Sure. And that's, one of the obvious things that the theologians, or the religious rather, will feel everything that you just described. I'll just phrase it this way. Everything that you just described for many religious people is in and of itself a moral abomination, a statement of moral abomination. A lot of people who are religious, feel that there are moral absolutes, and thus since we don't abide by those moral absolutes, we are immoral. So they kind of have this this moral system that pretty much dictates to them that we are essentially immoral in every way. I mean, they think that they are immoral. I don't want to get into that, but
sure.
Essentially, what I'm trying to get at here is, since we are in the minority, the religious will always poke and prod at us because they feel that any moral statement that we make is invalid. And if there are consistencies with their own religion, they're by coincidence, because they feel that without a moral absolute, what's the word I'm looking for here? And it's a source for their morals. That being God, that's their
moral
foundation.
Authority.
Yeah, that's their foundation for moral absolutes. And they feel that without a foundation for moral absolutes, everything is relativistic, just like you just said. And that system, that relativistic system, is what they are morally opposed to in the first place. So you're never really gonna get to any sort of agreement on that with the religious.
Well, and I wonder, I mean, over time, I think right now, there's a lot of hot seat kind of feelings. It can become a very non-dialogue. It can be a very combative thing. But I think over time, because at least from my perspective, when I was raised in a religious environment, the one thing that always struck me, it wasn't that it was a bad experience or anything like that. I had a great family, I had a great community, but the thing that struck me was the inconsistencies that hit me morally, ethically, as I was growing up, as I was asking about things. And that led me to go, I just can't find the consistency that I need. I understand the world is messy, but in that messiness, I'm starting to find consistent morals and ethics that I can apply across the board, where these more rigid constructs prevent me from doing it. They tell me that this is an absolute, but then I find a reason that, or an instance where that absolute doesn't fit, and that hurt my trust in it. I couldn't understand why that absolute would not include this other instance. And so I kind of decided as I grew up that I didn't want my child to be brought up like that. I didn't want my child to have to believe in an absolute that would exclude somebody else or something else for reasons that couldn't be explained.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that over time, sorry, I kind of lost my track there. I'm hoping over time that as we have those conversations and we start to agree that the world is a little bit messier than we think, that maybe some of those absolutes will start to be less rigid, and maybe we can come to some agreements on that.
I certainly hope so. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We always are on the same cue, Caleb, you and I. Well, when you look at, the Christian religion, the 10 Commandments, which are, for a lot of people, the pinnacle of moral authority, the first 4 commandments are, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images, thou shalt not take thy name of the Lord thy God in vain, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And then you get into some of the, if you disregard the idea of moral authority, then like you were saying, Caleb, their brain will just totally close off. So
I know exactly what you mean, man, because I had a conversation, a very wonderful, fun conversation with a coworker of mine, and I told him that ontologically, I'm a moral nihilist. I honestly don't feel that there are any moral absolutes, and he just could not fathom how I could possibly create a worldview with that as my ontological fact of life. I mean, that's just how I feel. That's just the way it is for me. So he just can't wrap his brain around it, and he just can't accept it. And the conversation went nowhere. But
yeah. Huh.
there was just, I tried everything I could think of. And quite frankly, he just could not accept that it's possible to build a moral system without having some sort of higher being or a higher something that it comes from, some thing out there. He thinks that there has to be an actual moral absolute of some kind.
Well, we can think of a lot of exceptions to what we consider almost moral absolutes, like not to kill another human being. Well, I can think of exceptions to that rule.
Sure.
You know, in self-defense or stealing or, there's a lot of different kind of moral rules of heuristics that we use that there's exceptions to. And I try not to teach that kind of stuff to my kids, the big ones, like not yet until they're older. But
Sure.
I try to give them paint scenarios in which a moral code would not necessarily apply. And I guess it's important to me, I guess, to ask you guys, like, how do you guys feel about the idea of indoctrination in general? I mean, to give a child a moral code, more or less, to live by is a form of indoctrination. I find it to be necessary, I guess. I've heard arguments against that, though. Sometimes parents just want to let their kids go their own way and figure this stuff out for themselves. And I suppose that that's possible, but it seems like there would be an awful lot of grief in rearing a child.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm sorry. Go for it.
No, go for it, Caleb.
I was just gonna say, honestly, I feel that it's inevitable. Unless you're neglecting your children, this problem should be inevitable. So it's something that we should all be dealing with. I would hope that nobody's attempting to escape that responsibility.
Yeah,
I agree. But I think that most parents, in all reality, really want their children to be successful in life, and they want them to be happy, and they want them to be able to contribute and have a full life and contribute to their society, whether it be a smaller society or a bigger society. But in some way, I kind of feel like, that is a parent's true dream. Now, not every parent wants that dream in the same way, but at the same time, I think that every parent has that passion. And I think that passion is contagious to children, because every child, no matter what they're being raised or where they're being raised, has at least 4 years of just nothing but dealing with or watching their parents and learning and wanting to be like that person because it's the closest person that they see. And so that's their role model. And so when parents kind of start to not indoctrinate, but I think when they start to show, a child what is, maybe an idea of right and wrong, or a good or bad, or good or evil, when they start to show those ideas, those kids get very excited about them and want to emulate the parents' views on those. And so to answer your question, when it comes to indoctrination, I don't believe in hardcore indoctrination, because I feel like as a parent, as an adult, I want to be a critical thinker. I'm very passionate about being able to analyze things and make choices based on what I can see. And I want my child to be able to do that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to model that for her. And I don't want her to feel like you need to do this because I said this. I want her to be able to develop her own ideas critically about them. Now, do I want her to do it in a basis of love and do it in a basis of kindness and with a respect and regard for the people around her? Absolutely. So do I want her to learn those things from me? Yes. And I think she needs guidance in that. But am I going to tell her, you've got to respect your parents? You've got to not kill people? Well, yeah, I am, but I want her to understand why.
Right.
Right. My
she's going to say, well, why can't I? I hope.
Were you going to say something, Caleb?
I was, sure. So, my son's still very young. And, I've kind of noticed this because I have a very huge family. I've been around children my entire life, infants up. And one thing that I've really noticed is a certain kind of pattern. I mean, the first thing that you're going to teach them is to reduce harm. So they're going to try to, hit somebody. No, don't hurt them. Or they might try to hurt themselves or do something that might hurt themselves. No, don't hurt them. And in that process, you're automatically going to create this indoctrination of this automatic respect for authority. I am your authority. Listen to what I say.
Mm-hmm.
So, unless you're completely neglecting your child, there are certain things that are just inevitable that you're going to indoctrinate your child into. And so you go from that to the authority, and then you go from sort of a reduction of harm to a reduction of annoyance, to then talking about teaching civility and so on and so forth. There's like a hierarchy to this, but it all stems from a reduction of harm. So that's again, what I try to introduce is, when I try to teach morality to somebody, I say, okay, well, we're going to start from here, the reduction of harm, and work our way up. And so that's also how I want to teach my child, and I'm hoping that I can do that. It's just like I said, earlier on, I don't have a book that I can open and give him examples of. So it's a little bit more complicated for the secular. They got to be a little more creative.
Now,
Right.
do you feel like that? I love that point. Do you feel like when you're dealing with that, rather than having a kind of a flat text to refer to, where it's kind of like, okay, read here. Now what happened there? Okay, good. But instead, it sounds like you're saying that you have to kind of deal with real experiences, or kind of look around you at real life and kind of talk about some of these ideas, obviously in an age appropriate way, but it's kind of real and it's more experiential for the child. Do you feel like that creates a more malleable critical thinking, or do you think that he's at the age that you have the ability to see that yet?
Well, honestly, I think that it gives them a more solid foundation for their entire perception of reality, quite frankly. Because the only examples that they have to learn from are actual examples. They're not made up crap that was invented 2,000 years ago. So that in and of itself is a pretty good advantage. But like I said, the difficulty comes in trying to come up with ways in real time in the real world to explain to your child why they should or shouldn't do a certain thing, why they ought not to do a thing or ought to do a thing in certain cases. Now, the oughts and the shoulds, obviously, there's a very large distinction there, so those are the little nuanced things that you got to kind of figure out how to deal with. And honestly, I'm not quite there yet. My son's only 17 months old, so
Yeah.
I got a ways to go.
Yeah.
I found it all to be much easier. I have a 6-year-old daughter, soon to be 7. But once she started to experience empathy, or be able to experience empathy, then teaching morality to her just got a lot easier, because I could say, well, how would you feel if somebody did that to you? And as soon as she was able to do that, then she was like, oh no, I wouldn't like that. That really is like the biggest tool in my arsenal, I guess, in teaching morality, is empathy. And I find that as she's getting older, and she's not quite there yet where she becomes more self-aware of how she looks to other people, that will be another way for me to teach morality to her. It seems to be working pretty good. I have another daughter too, but she's not just getting to the age where we can do more with that. But the one big question I have is, I've really tried to instill, this golden rule sort of idea in my older daughter, but I don't want her to be bound by it. Like, there's times in her life where she's going to have to stand up for herself and, make choices that would seem contrary to this, to the golden rule. So how do you teach your child to not be a good person when the time is right, and not just be, stomped on in a particular situation? So I struggle with that. But I feel like I need to just give her a really solid foundation in the golden rule, and then we can talk about these more complex issues about when it doesn't apply and that sort of stuff a little bit later on, when she's more capable of understanding that. But I feel like I would be doing my daughter a disservice if I didn't teach her when morality does not apply or when something breaks the rules and you need to change the way that you view it. So I guess that's a certain form of morality, I guess you would say, that I'm trying to figure out how to teach her as well.
Well, I think oh, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
No, I just went on my last rant. You go ahead, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just gonna say, I think that kind of bleeds into my next question, was just in general, does anybody have any tips for the world out there for how to raise secular children? But that one, that really hits the nail on the head. And for me, I kind of feel like it's important to teach a child how to think. I mean, really, how, as they're growing along, they're going to, first off, they're going to have to learn how to ask the question why. So for me, I never just, when she was very young, I decided I never was going to tell her to stop asking me why. I decided I would find new ways to kind of redirect her when I was done playing the why game, but I didn't want her to get the idea that asking why was a bad idea, because I wanted her to eventually be able to say, well, why is it that I'm supposed to be nice to people, but in this case, maybe that's not the best idea. So I kind of started early with that, and I would teach her the why game. And she would ask the why game, and I would give her as many answers as I could. And then when I wanted to be done with it, I would make up nonsense sentences. And eventually she would just go, huh? And just walk away. Oh, she knew Daddy was done then. But she got lots of information to go and think about. And I didn't tell her just because I didn't want her to have that kind of empty absolute of it's just because. So that was one thing I did. The other thing I kind of did was I started playing games with her early on, thinking games, to help her think about different ideas and make her own understandings about it. And they were just simple games. Like we started off with one called Real or Not Real, which just helped her kind of develop an idea that not everything was real and not everything was not real. So when she comes up to those bigger ideas, like, should I always be nice to people? Well, yes, you should generally, but maybe not always, because it's not always one or the other. So I would ask her things like, I wasn't going to ruin Santa Claus for her, but eventually, we started talking about things like, okay, goblins. We'd look at a fairy book and say, okay, goblins, do you think those are real or are they not real? And she would say, And we would talk about, well, do you see those things? No. Okay, so are they real or not real? And that she eventually started to develop her own understanding of that, and then she could apply it. And that was actually really helpful also, because it helped with the monsters under the bed and the closet thing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Never had a problem with it. All of a sudden it was, Daddy, there's a monster in my closet. Kyla, real or not real? She was like, oh.
How do I see this picture of your daughter being a little bit older, and you're going to say, real or not real? And she's going to be like, Dad, God, no more of this. I can't take it anymore.
Yeah. And so she can be like, or I'll be saying something. She'll be like, Dad, real or not real? Be like, no, shut up.
Right?
I swear they were looking at me funny. Dad, real or not real?
That's going to come back to haunt you.
But just things like that helped her to kind of build the ability to entertain ideas. And maybe that's something that other people can use to help kind of get around some of those black or white issues.
That's a clever way of doing it.
I'm hoping. I'll let you know how it works out.
Yeah, really. I also feel like no matter what you do, you're going to screw up your child somehow, some way. So I just try to do the best I can. Hopefully, however I screw up my kid won't be too terrible.
Yeah. Caleb, anything that you've heard or that you're just dying to try out?
Honestly, to answer your question, D, I honestly think I'm hoping to sort of bypass that problem altogether by just kind of explaining to him in however way I can that there are no moral absolutes. So when you're trying to judge something, you need to judge it for what it is, not what you think it should be, based on some sort of system that you've created that's based on these moral absolutes. Every situation is unique, so you need to evaluate it. This sort of there are no guarantees in life thing really applies to everything. So everything that I teach him, I'm going to essentially let him know that there are very few things that you can know for certain, and just to move on from there. But I honestly,
well, I really like that. I'm just going to interrupt you real quick to say I really like that, because I feel like that'll help him learn the kind of scientific method mindset of evaluate and then reevaluate your own perceptions of it, and then change it if it's necessary or not.
Oh, absolutely, man. I'm really hoping. I pray to the universe that I can somehow get him to be motivated about education, motivated to learn. I honestly didn't appreciate learning until my senior year in high school, and that's when it really kicked me in the butt. I kind of got an eye opener, and it made me realize that this crap that they're teaching me is important, and there's so much more out there that I need to learn. And I'm hoping that I can instill a scientific mindset, a scientific approach to literally everything. I mean, aside from the arts, but well, sure, hell, even the arts. I took a couple of years of music theory, so you could apply science to literally anything. So I'm hoping to be able to instill that sort of mindset. And again, we have an advantage here as secular individuals raising secular children, because we, if we're teaching them secularly, they're not coming into these into the lab, if you will, with religious preconceptions, and that will just throw them off. It's inevitable. If you believe that God created the universe, and that he did it 6,000 years ago, that's going to radically affect the way that you approach science. So again, this is the advantage that we hold, because everything that our child has learned comes from real world experience, tangible things that they can actually relate to, that exist. So so we have that advantage. I don't want to, I don't know, I kind of feel like we're pressing this on the negative side pretty heavy. There are some serious negative side effects to raising secular children just because we are in the minority. For example, Heather and I want to put our child through the best possible education that we can afford. We're fortunate enough to be able to afford to send our child to a non-public school. So we have some options, but quite frankly, because of our location, most of the private schools are religious. So we actually had to decide to bite the bullet and pick one. And quite frankly, we saw that the benefits to him getting that education outweighed all the cons. Even if they try to teach him certain things that I necessarily wouldn't appreciate, I think that still we can work around that because of how we're going to raise him. So that's a definite drawback. We don't have very many secular options in the area that would provide him the equivalent level of education, prestigious education. Because I really want to make sure that he is able to be an engineer or something.
Sure.
Not that there's any problem with being in the workforce, but everyone wants their child to be successful, and I think this is the best way to do it.
Now, you mentioned it interestingly. So you're considering going to a religious private school. How would you, as a raising a secular child, how would you feel about exposure to religions or philosophical discussions with your child? Is that something?
I actually
I think
don't mind it.
And I know I wasn't at the very beginning. Like when I first had a kid, I was like, oh my gosh, there's no way I want my kid to know anything about it. Like I'm going to move her halfway across the world so she doesn't have to. And I did. But then I started thinking to myself, okay, how is this necessarily a bad thing, or is it more about how I couch it? So how are you going to kind of address that?
Well, honestly, the idea of him being in, thrown religious jargon and thematic education, if you will, doesn't really concern me too much because, well, for one, the school that we chose, from what I understand, I've done some investigating into this. We did quite a bit of research. We wanted to make sure that we did the best possible. Chose the best possible school. So this school doesn't really push the religious stuff very hard, and the stuff that they do push is, just kind of like traditional Christmas type, Easter, religious holidays. They take them pretty seriously there. But aside from that, he's already going to be exposed to religious. To the religious. My entire family's religious, and I'm not planning on, keeping him out of their lives just because they're religious. So,
Right.
These things are going to come up regardless. So we'll be able to deal with them, even before he goes to school. And so that aspect of it doesn't really concern me so much anymore. But it was a major concern because we went through a lot of these schools, and like some of these, I almost mentioned some names. Some of these schools are ridiculously religious, and the education that they provide is ridiculous. So, if there's anyone listening and you're trying to pick schools, and you're in the Fort Wayne area, there are a lot of options out there. Make sure you do your research. Do this well in advance.
So, Dee, do you have anything to say about that? Because I know that your daughter is about the same age as my daughter, and exposure to religion is something that I've kind of thought about over time, but how to present that is my question.
Well, it's definitely come up just because of her age and being around, and from family issues too. But I guess I have a certain bias here, and that is that I believe religion's pretty much dying anyway, and that there's too much information out there for people to just, if they have a decent understanding of science and stuff, it's going to be hard to make the switch over to like traditional Christianity. But that's just my opinion. I could be totally wrong. But I just let it happen for the most part. I do not stand in the way of an argument. I do stand in the way of indoctrination. So if somebody wants to state their opinion about something, that's totally fine. But once they try to use any kind of shaming or you're wrong or anything like that, then I will definitely butt in. But we talk about it, and I tell her what I think, and I also talk about the other side of the argument and why people may think something different. And I am very careful to not let her just buy into my argument. Now, I know a lot of kids just want to do that, and you have to give them some room to just kind of be kids and kind of do what their parents do. But
Sure.
I try to make it very well known to her that I expect her to not just spout off my beliefs and somebody else is wrong based upon hearing what her parents do. So I try to encourage her, even at our age, to develop her own opinion, and if she doesn't have one, that she should work on it as she gets older.
Okay.
But I know at 6 or 7, that's not too much to ask. I'm just trying to lay a foundation. That's basically how I do it.
You know what? After you say that, I'm sorry, Chris, but I feel like I missed the crux of your. I feel like I missed the crux of your question because, I feel like now you're kind of asking me how I would introduce my child to religion while still maintaining a secular upbringing, and I kind of took that a little bit too.
No, I appreciate it.
Literal.
But yeah, if you have any ideas on that too, we can go that route.
Yeah, man. Well, I've been giving this a lot of thought because this is coming up very soon. He's just now starting to put together short sentences. So I honestly, that aspect of it actually kind of scares me. I don't quite know how I'm going to approach it yet. The one thing that I can think of is the first time he approaches me by saying anything about the word God in general. I'm going to ask him, so where did you hear about this? And, so I'll figure out the source. And generally, I would think that it's from a person or a movie or something. And so I can just hopefully have a very, very layman talking to a toddler conversation such that and that's one thing that kind of scares me a little bit. I have a difficulty just the way that I process information, bringing things down to a toddler level. So that kind of scares me a little bit in and of itself. But I'm hoping that I can just explain to him that so God is this being, like a person, that certain people, most people, believe in. Nobody really knows if this person exists or not. And, I can kind of hopefully leave it at that for a while till he comes on with some stronger questions about God. Then we can, discuss those. But, I just really want him to get an understanding that, because that's really all he needs to know, is as far as he's concerned, this is just some person that people believe in. And so until he comes up with some deeper questions, which I'm hoping that by now I could answer. But, that moment kind of scares me because, I don't know how he's going to push it. I don't know how he'll take it, but I don't even know if it'll work. I've never done this. So.
I'm not even totally sure if my daughter were to believe if it would really bother me all that much, to be honest with you. I mean, I feel like I have a certain duty to my children to try to help them think things through. And, of course, I think that doesn't include the idea of a God, but a lot of people have, they need this. This is like a really important part of their life for whatever reason. And I would consider it a crutch, but for some people it's more than a crutch. It's like life support. So I don't want to, I feel like I just got to give my daughter as much knowledge as I can, and I don't want to get too attached to the outcome, because the last thing I want to do is drive her away, or put her in a position where she feels like she can't talk to me, because I mean, you all know this has been a process, and the longer I live, the more I realize how little tiny ideas become, much larger over time. So I just want to be careful with my girls to not push them too hard in any particular direction.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I agree with you. It's just, I feel like I'm a little bit more anti-religious than you in general. And, because of that, I honestly feel that, and this is going to sound pretty harsh, but quite frankly, I honestly feel that if my son grew up believing in God, that I'd sort of failed him in some way. I feel like this is a disadvantage. I really do. But it's not something that would affect our relationship by any means. There's nothing that's going to separate me and my son, short of him murdering my wife or something. But yeah. I mean, sort of some extreme example. There's, I don't really care. I would be extremely beyond disappointed, quite frankly, if he was to go to like fundamentalist Islam. That would be
that's interesting,
very disappointing.
I think it's interesting because we are coming to a point, like I said, where these issues are becoming more visible, and we're seeing relationships between spouses or even extended family differ, or in opinion on their level of religion, or even their style of religion. For us. It was kind of Disney helped a lot, because with all the Disney movies with all the gods, they've made one for about every pantheon of religion out there. So we got to kind of talk about those, and we're like, well, see that one, that's Zeus. Yes, Zeus was a god and he threw lightning bolts. Now, is that real or not real? And she would say, well, not real. And then we'd say, okay, so there's another one about an omnipotent God that apparently doesn't care about kids in hospitals. I don't know. But is that something that, does that sound real or not real? And she would go, well, Zeus isn't real, so I guess, B. So those are some ways that we have kind of addressed it or dealt with it. But knowing that there's, my parents are very religious, and knowing that that's an important part of their life, we didn't want our daughter to think poorly of them. And so we just kind of had to find a common ground. And we kind of had to do that from a basis of just saying, you know what, we are kind people. It doesn't matter who believes what, as long as they're kind people and they're loving people as well. That's really where we're coming from. So I think that's going to become a continuous interesting development as all of our kids grow up.
Yeah, I kind of think I would describe the way that I plan on raising my son as sort of a hippie slash brush it off, you'll be fine kind of mentality as we grow up. That's how I kind of picture it.
Well, I'm waiting for the rebellious years.
Right. Well,
so that brings me to my next question, maybe my last question, because I don't know how much time we've got left. But those rebellious years, I know I was rebellious when I was a kid. And if my parents liked it, I hated it. And with my desire to fit in, but not with my parents, that no matter what they said, no matter where it was coming from, I kind of maybe went the other way. So how are you feeling about the social pressure that kids may feel to be joining a religious group or going on a youth trip with a religious affiliated association or something like that?
Oh, I would most definitely let him do it. I wouldn't stop him from pursuing it by any means. I would honestly question him along the way. Like, so what do you think about this? That the thing that he just learned, I'm not going to like poke and prod at it too hard, but if he's wanting to go to like Sunday or not Sunday, like youth group events that they have at churches, I know people that used to do that just to hang out that weren't religious. So I have no problem with stuff like that in general.
I think there's the downside of religion too. I think we all kind of agree. If like people like kind of want to believe, and that's fine, that's okay. But what about when it becomes like evangelical, or it becomes us against them, the black and white thinking? That would be really hard for me to swallow. To watch my children go down that path. That would be very hard.
Yeah, it just quite frankly, it wouldn't fly. I mean, the moment that he strikes some, 1 Timothy, shut your mouth, woman, on my wife, that's going to be the end of that, and we're going to have a serious. Okay, look, this is why because again, I'm a lot more anti-religious than you guys, so I would have no problem if something like that were to happen. Having that tough. Okay, this is why what you believe is bullcrap.
Right.
And I would have to have that conversation at that point with him. But until he pushes a button similar to that, if he starts getting bigoted towards homosexuals, for example,
sure,
I would most definitely step in and be like, okay, well, let's figure out why you think this is wrong, and hopefully I can persuade you otherwise. So that's the conversation I would have. But if he was really, really adamant about it, as a parent, I still feel that look, you're not his friend, you're his parent, and if you feel that this is wrong, I don't know, keep pushing it from time to time. Don't pester him with it, but
sure.
If the opportunity presents itself, he brings up the subject. Okay, well, let's have the conversation again. Because it's going to happen. Because I talk about, I have in my real life, when I'm hanging out with friends, there's a lot of homosexual humor involved. So I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if something like that were to trigger him. If, he was this adamant anti-gay person, I don't think I could not trigger him.
Sure. So let me flip that topic a little bit. Then, because I think this is something that all of us can really definitely relate to, is what if during their social years as they're growing up, they start to feel, let's say that we teach them to love themselves and be themselves and, try to be confident in assumedly their secular views, if they develop those. What happens if we start to feel like they are being ostracized or pushed away by the majority, which most likely may still be religious? How would you, have you thought about how you
that's already come up? That's already come up for me. Yeah. I mean, basically one time my daughter came home and said, I told my friends that I didn't believe in God. And which was like, why did you say that? Like, and then, somebody, one of her friends said, what? Or it just really, it kind of shocked her. And my daughter, that there was like a lot of resistance to it. And this is first grade, mind you. And I I just figured I better be honest with her about it. I said, there's a lot of people who disagree with that, and you may lose a friend. You just be careful how you talk about it. And I kind of went into like making sure you understand what you believe. I don't think that you really do understand what you believe yet, and understand that other people are the same way. And just realized that it's a sensitive topic. I didn't know what else to say at this age.
It's tough. I think it's tough because we want our kids to grow up with friends and
right,
healthy social life. But like you said, even as young as that, I know that I find myself just going, I want you to be able to be you and be accepted for who you are. And if that's who you think that you are and you're choosing to be that way, it makes me upset that you would have to deal with that. But I know that it's there. I know that's there. What about you, Caleb? Have you thought about that at all? I know your son's very young, so probably.
Yeah, no, I have. And that this topic kind of gets my heart fluttering a little bit because, I honestly haven't given it much thought because when I do, I kind of panic a little bit. I honestly don't know. Excuse me. I honestly don't know how I would handle a situation like that. I mean, if my son came home from third grade and said, the kids are, picking on me, and why? Well, they were talking about God, and I said, well, I don't believe in God, and so I have to have that conversation. I don't know. I mean, when you're talking about a bunch of third grade, I mean, if I was talking to
right.
If I was talking to an adult that's saying, oh, my coworkers are dicks, well, either don't talk about religion or find someone else to talk to. But, this is a third grader, and so he's got a whole life to live and create for himself. So I have to find a way to make this tolerable for him, hopefully beyond tolerable, hopefully wonderful, as a matter of fact. But find a way to make it work. I don't know. I don't know what to do. I mean, obviously, it would depend on the situation, too, but...
But it scares me because I know that, children they can be brutally honest and brutally vicious. I can remember being in first or second grade and having somebody just totally rip on my name. It just making me feel terrible just because they found a funny way to say my name. And I was like, ouch, sure. And for somebody to be in that position, like I know my daughter has asked me before. She said, okay, my best friend is, she really believes in God. Why does she believe in God? And, luckily my daughter had not said anything about it. She's pretty non-combative about it because her cousins are very religious as well. And so for her, it's just kind of she realizes the world is the way it is and people believe a lot of different things. She's got friends overseas that believe in Shintoism and Buddhism and go to shrines and stuff. So for her, it's kind of like, okay, I'm just kind of watching all this and I just don't understand why they think that way, but okay, they're good people. But I could feel her wanting to have that connection or wanting to be able to share on a different level with that friend and feeling that divide. Luckily wasn't being aimed at her, but just knowing that was there kind of put a little schism in their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That was...
Yeah. Well, you gotta let everybody choose if they want to be, quote unquote, a martyr for the cause. Do they want to, go out there and come out of the closet? I don't know what it's called when you let everybody know that you're not a believer. But you don't want to make that choice for them. So, everybody's kind of different in that kind of.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm hoping that, I don't know if it's even possible. Maybe this is a pipe dream, but I'm actually kind of hoping that it never even really has to come up. I mean, if he's not going to school, asking questions about people's beliefs, and people aren't asking questions about his beliefs, I mean, hopefully it's something that, as so far as developing a peer group, so I'm sorry. Wow, I went on. I lost. What was I even talking about? Hold on a second.
Hoping not going to be an issue.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so so far as having friends and just going through high school, just the high school life. I mean, I'm hoping that like getting picked on for being an atheist isn't something that I have to even deal with. Quite frankly, I knew atheists in high school, and who were openly atheists, very open about it, you know, because they're trying to make a statement too. And
That would have been me.
you know, nobody really messed with them, at least so far as the religious aspect of it. I mean, they would just, they just poke them for being the outcast, but not necessarily because they're atheists.
Got run out of town.
Yeah, probably.
I did. I practically got run out of town, but that was okay.
You did. Wow. Well, I want to say, the world is changing so fast right now, so fast. So I'd like to think in 10 years, I can't really predict what it's going to be like. I think people are going to be much more open to these ideas, but I don't know. Once again,
No, I'm right there with you, man. I think the internet killed religion. It's just taking its sweet time. It's a poison. It's not a bullet.
A good way to put it. I like that.
Yeah. I think our kids are going to be a major factor in that. I think that as we're teaching them secular values, as we're teaching them to be kind and to love other people, because if we're not showing kindness, there's no divine being going to step in and do it. If they're going forth with that kind of attitude, I think that's going to be an important part of that, of helping the world see that we can treat each other that way, regardless of whether or not we share all the same beliefs. So.
Yeah. Well, honestly, it's not the secular people that are all that bigoted or so anti-religious that they don't want to be associated with religious people in any way. Excuse me. So really, most of this fighting that's going on is between religious people about religion, and we're not really part of that conversation.
Yeah, but we're a different part of it. When we're out on a radio show, you know, espousing, basically knocking religion for an hour once a week. Not always, but it's definitely on our minds, I think.
Well, hold on. I'm specific. Well, okay. I guess
I knocked Buddhism and Shintoism too.
Well, I actually think it's really important to bring up your children with a pretty well-developed understanding of other religions and other cultures. I think having a perspective of what it's like not here is important. And I really hope that I can also, especially once he hits the high school and middle school age, later end of middle school, you know, kind of getting him to understand why people might be the way they are, you know, culture, indoctrination, you know, talking about how malleable the human mind is, how susceptible we are to biases and so on. You know, these are really important ways of raising your children, but we're not having the conversation of, no, this is why, Proverbs chapter 16 is wrong. No, this is why it says this. We're not having that. Yeah, we're not having that conversation. So, I don't know. I don't feel that, I just don't see an equivalence in my mind between talking about religious dogma and talking about the absence of religious dogma.
True. But, well, so that's about all the questions I had, other than,
I was going to mention, I think we got one or two more minutes. I was going to mention, with the advent of the internet and knowledge being more open and kind of like the death of religion.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and on meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.